everybody. Welcome to the Pharmaceutical Cannabis Report webinar. I'm very excited to be moderating this session today. So before I start even introducing our audience, I just want to say to everybody that's connected to the webinar that we do have a special discount for all attendees. So you can see the discount code in the chat is WEB30. And for this discount, you get 30% off. It's like £550. And it's active just until midnight tomorrow. That's Friday, 29th of September. So don't miss this occasion. And today we're here with Lawrence from Prohibition Partners, Analyst, that kind of led the research for and writing for a pharmaceutical report. And then Fabio and Viola from Cannabiscientia, collaborating to this report, brought a incredibly valuable amount of knowledge on pharmaceutical cannabis. So yeah, let's just dive in with this. Laurie, do you want to give a bit of a sort of overview of what the report is about, and what are the key insights that the attendees can find in the report?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Barbara. So first, I think it's helpful to define what we mean when we talk about pharmaceutical cannabis. So we are talking about medicines which have gone through the standard stages of development and testing and have been approved by a health authority for specific conditions. So we're talking about like a Epidiolex, like Sativex, that have gone through all clinical trials and have been approved, given a medical marketing authorization, and then are used to treat named conditions. So, well as Sativex and Epidiolex, you have dronabinol, nabilone, and one or two others. So it's quite a specific market we're talking about here. So inside the report is a deep dive into everything that's going on with pharmaceutical cannabis, and it covers global geography. So we look at all the recent developments, trends, what are the main stories in the space, who are the main players at the moment, and what's the current state of research and development. So what areas are gaining the most interest and investment, whether that's different cannabinoids, conditions, devices, different conditions linked to different cannabinoids being used for treatment of different conditions. So what are the most promising, where are the areas of the next potential breakthrough? We also have market sizing forecasts at a regional level for each of the main pharmaceutical cannabis products. We look at technological development and innovation in the space. And the report is extremely data driven. So it's informed by two large data sets, really extensive and comprehensive data sets. So that's clinical trials, all clinical trials that have happened globally in medical cannabis or in pharmaceutical cannabis, I should say, since 2010. And also a look at the patent landscape relating to pharmaceutical cannabis, obviously dominated by GW Pharmaceuticals, but also there's some other players in there at the moment. So we'll get into that during the discussion in the webinar. But I mean, in the context of the report, a lot of insight is gained from analyzing these data sets, and especially looking at them in conjunction. They tell us a lot about where the pharmaceutical cannabis space is heading right now, and what the most promising areas are at the moment. So in terms of key takeaways from the report, just to give a quick overview of a couple of topics. On the clinical trials side, there's a strong focus on pain at the clinical level. There's lots of research going into developing cannabinoid treatments of pain. And yeah, there's been a lot of interest around pain for a number of years now, but it's still really strong. There's still a lot of new activity happening. CBD as well in recent years. So there's a lot of new activity going on in CBD, and as well as the adjacent compounds around CBD, so CBDA, CBDV, these kind of things. And that's seeing a lot of activity in clinical trials as the treatment, but also in the patent landscape. So there's a lot of new patents being filed around potential uses of CBD or the potential new applications, new ways of making it, manufacturing it. In general, there's still a really strong focus on the main major cannabinoids, CBD and THC, and the compounds which are adjacent to them, rather than there's no, let's say, breakthrough new cannabinoid or minor cannabinoid that's garnering anywhere near as much attention as the major ones still are. As I mentioned, GW is still dominating the market, certainly at a commercial level, but in IP as well. And it's heavily involved in clinical research, and that's really ongoing. So there's lots of new activity from them as well. And overall, there's just still huge potential in the space. There's massive opportunities for the companies which will see the next breakthrough. And there's quite a few companies involved in the space and looking at these areas of interest. And so there's some interesting activity from a lot of different fronts. And yeah, I mean, the size of the prize is demonstrated by the explosion of Epidiolex sales in the last few years, and the valuation of GW Pharma. Yeah, it's interesting to see where the next breakthrough will come from. So I think I'll leave it there for now in terms of an overview. We can go into more discussion when we get into the main part of the webinar.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, great overview. Looking forward to this discussion. So let's dive in. I mean, you mentioned, Laurie, various cannabinoids. So Fabio, let's dive into that. What are really the cannabinoids that are garnering the most attention in research, or like clinical or otherwise? Like, what's your view on this topic?
Yes, thank you, Barbara, and good afternoon to everyone. So for sure, the two main phytocannabinoids found in the cannabis plant have been the focus of research in the last years. We have cannabidiol, or CBD, that has been a major focus of research due to its potential therapeutic properties and its non-psychoactive nature. Indeed, we have a lot of studies that were exploring its use in various medical conditions such as epilepsy, anxiety, pain management, and neurodegenerative disease. We have for sure tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, the psychoactive component of the cannabis plant, and the research are focused mainly on its pain relief property and also for its use against nausea and vomiting, and also for appetite stimulation. But apart for these two main cannabinoids, we have also other cannabinoids that are gaining attention. For example, cannabigerol, or CBG, was gaining attention for its potential anti-inflammatory and anti-anxiety properties. Moreover, it's a very effective agent to counteract drug-resistant bacteria, such as the Staphylococcus. And so maybe in the next years, we will find a lot of research about this. Then it comes into my mind the tetrahydrocannabivarin, or THCV, that has been investigated for its potential to influence appetite, metabolism, and its role in diabetes management. We have also cannabidivarin that is under investigation because it shows good activity in epileptic patients and no other neurological disorders. And then we have also the acidic form of the cannabinoids, such as tetrahydrocannabinolic acid and cannabidiolic acid, that are very interesting because they do not pass the blood-brain barrier. So they have a peripheral effect that may be exploited in a lot of conditions. And moreover, in addition to the classic cannabinoid, many clinical trials have explored other compounds that interact with the endocannabinoid system. For example, the palmitoyl ethanol amine, or the PIA, possess very interesting anti-inflammatory and analgesic activity. And we have also compound influences in the cannabinoid metabolism, like the inhibitors of the enzyme that metabolize cannabinoid. That can be a new area of research in the next few years.
Thank you. Very exhaustive, and I think super interesting also to mention like non-cannabinoids and other compounds that come from the plant, because maybe that go a bit more under the radar. Thank you so much, Viola. Let's go back to the big ones. Let's say CBD. I know there's been a lot of activity. Are we seeing like research developing currently, and is it still like center of attention? This very new interest in CBD.
Hi, Barbara. Hi, Lawrence, Fabio, everyone here. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. CBD, obviously, it's a big topic, especially because let's not forget we are just in 2023 and the FDA approval of Epidiolex, which the main constituent of Epidiolex is actually CBD extract, was only in 2018. So we're just beginning to start to basically generate a ROI over all the studies that have been created for creating and licensing this medicine. The FDA approval only came for 2 and then became 3 small niche, meaning, yes, we talk about epilepsy, but in practice, what it is, it's pharmacoresistance type of epilepsy, like Lennox-Gastaut, Dravet syndrome. Afterwards, there was also the addition of tuberous sclerosis. So obviously, when you look at the majority of studies that are phase 3, meaning the studies that have included thousands of patients, by far, the majority of studies in phase 3 with CBD are on epilepsy, almost 60% of them. When you look at the complexities of studies on CBD, you still have a slight prevalence of pain. And so this, again, maybe goes in a conversation that we started having on why it's so. And usually it's the proceeding of studies on pain that tends to be difficult to arrive and get to a phase 3. But it's quite evident that this union of the molecule CBD and the absence of a generic. Let's not forget that the big issue that we're starting to see here is that there is not any generic available for Epidiolex at the moment, and this, of course, creates some issues with the exclusive rights of commercialization, the production, and so on, which we're starting to see because at the beginning of this year there were already a lot of lawsuits that were filed by Jazz Pharmaceuticals on competitors. But it's very easy to become a competitor because, as you know, CBD is one of the components of many magistrate preparation across Europe. So this, of course, is starting to create an interesting compliance issue, I would say. And maybe it's worth also to mention that what we're seeing as well at the moment with regulations in Italy, it kind of starts to look and match this situation, as in really there is no space for anything that is CBD and is not medical. And then probably the next phase is going to be how do you start to create a match with a generic for CBD studies. But just to go back on what's been researched, I think the most interesting part that you can notice in terms of main differences is that when you look at the plant or studies done on both CBD and THC, you have pretty much the same amount of studies on pain, whether there is like CBD as an isolate compound or as both compounds. Whilst on one hand, you start to see quite a prevalence of studies, for example, on anxiety, on cancer, on psychiatric disorders. So this suggests us that there is an easier route for ethical committee to provide approvals in the direction of CBD. Also, it's quite striking how, yes, it's true that if you look at the last 10 years and you compare and contrast CBD only and then CBD plus THC, pretty much it's the same percentage. But if you are being a little bit more specific and look at what's happening in the last 2-3 years, you see that there is a massive raise actually of a CBD alone. It's around 50% of the one initiated in 2022 are all about CBD alone. So the interest in this molecule is definitely higher as we go along in the last years. That's quite the trend, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. That was very, very insightful, I think, also a mention of pain. Let's talk about like another, I'd say, big, relatively big, at least compared to the others. Like, what about dronabinol, or what's the situation of a market there? I don't know if Viola or Fabio you want to answer this
Yeah,
one.
I can take this. Well, dronabinol, let's first of all, I think there is a lot of confusion in what dronabinol is. I heard people that actually sell dronabinol that had no clue what dronabinol was. So let's just define it. Dronabinol is delta 9 THC, and it can be synthetic, but it can also come from an extracted source, because many have the idea that if you hear dronabinol, needs by all means need to be something that is synthetic. That is not the truth. Dronabinol can also come from extraction, basically. So it can come from a plant. Now, the thing about dronabinol, again, it's a play. This is the fascination of names. But we are talking about nothing else different than marinol. And marinol, for the ones that have started working with cannabis many years ago, probably strike more in their memory, because it was the name of the first delta 9 THC that basically was first FDA approved in 1985. You remember all the old studies that were done on cannabis, or basically THC, used as a palliative substance, so mainly for chemotherapy studies, for vomiting and nausea. And basically, once the generic of marinol is dronabinol, so that's all it is. Once the rights of IP expired, then we started to have also another compound, which is still dronabinol, that is called Syndros, and this has been approved by FDA in 2016. Now, and for the same claims, okay. Also, afterwards, over the years, I think in the 90s, have been added to these the appetite stimulation, again for chemotherapy, but also for HIV. So is really the basis of where the whole cannabis research sort of started. Now, I think again, what's interesting is that it's a compound that mainly it's sold in two areas of the world, which is US and Europe, but then also has a quite high specificity in regional and geographical specificity. Because, for example, dronabinol is used as now pretty much most of the sales are done of the generic, so of dronabinol. And in Europe, it is still used for medicinal preparation, but basically only in German-speaking countries. So Germany, it's actually the big driver of the sales of dronabinol for Europe, obviously. And then you have Austria, and a little bit also the market goes in Denmark and Switzerland. So it's interesting to note how countries that use magistral preparation and they use CBD, not all of them use CBD from the same sources, and how this sometimes is really has mainly market reasons rather than science reasons. But yeah, this is the little story on dronabinol. Honestly, I can tell you, as for Europe, you have quite a striking complete difference. So it's difficult to speak about sales of Europe. You really need to look at which countries, because, for example, I have here a note of $30 million sales every year of dronabinol just in Germany. And in Italy is like not even sold. And these are both countries that have quite a developed, I mean, for European standard, medical cannabis market. So it's interesting to see how market plays a factor here, and not just science, obviously.
Yeah, and yeah, it's super interesting. Like the specificity of different markets, like depends on literally some trading elements, some insurance and kind of public health like policies adopted. So very interesting. I mean, you just mentioned among other things, like in your discussion, like pain treatment. So that's definitely like a kind of big field for research and development of drugs. I was wondering, Fabio, could you dive in a bit more and tell us what type of pain and what's the current status of research on pain?
Yes, sure. Viola was mentioning that the first studies around cannabinoids, and historically, pain is one of the main conditions for which cannabis and cannabinoids are used for. Indeed, the first research is on the potential clinical application of cannabis back in the 70s, focused around the pain. And even in the past years, there has been a huge increase in clinical trials examining the potential benefits of cannabis and cannabinoids for various pain conditions, particularly chronic and neuropathic pain. But what kind of pain is better treated with the cannabinoids? Now we have to make like a difference. Indeed, we have to keep in mind that pain is a broad term encompassing a lot of different conditions like thermal, inflammatory, mechanical pain, affective pain. And in some circumstances, cannabinoids can be used, but not in all the circumstances. Indeed, the same condition may be better addressed with cannabinoid. And for example, the better conditions are for sure inflammatory pain and neuropathic pain, or in general, what we call chronic pain. That means a pain that lasts for at least 3 months without disappearing. While other conditions may be less responsive to cannabinoid. For example, acute pain. If I have a cut in my finger, probably cannabinoid won't be useful for this. But the main research on pain regarding cannabis and cannabinoid are focused on chronic pain, and we have very good results. For example, a lot of conditions that have chronic pain as symptoms are really very well addressed with cannabinoids. For example, the pain related to multiple sclerosis, cancer pain, or pain linked also to inflammatory conditions such as inflammatory bowel disease and so on. So chronic pain is the main condition that can be treated with cannabinoids. We have a clear result, but we need to do more. Indeed, scaling and evaluating pain is still a difficult thing, and there is a need for more standardized method and validated method to address pain, and so to understand the real use of cannabinoid, especially to understand which cannabinoids is better, because both THC and CBD can be used for pain, but we have to discriminate what kind of pain is better treated with the THC or with the CBD, and so.
Thank you very much. Super interesting. Yeah, like as Laurie said, one of the main assets of a report is thorough research around clinical trials. So definitely invite everybody to dive in the report for more insights around these things. Actually, on the clinical trials, there's another, I think, something that's covered in the report that's very interesting to me for sure, which is the funding of clinical research. So yeah, Viola, could you give us like an idea of what type of organization are actually funding trials, and what's the effect of funding on the progressing of research, let's say?
Yeah, that's a big topic actually. I have been over the years approached by many companies that want to run research on cannabinoids. So I think it's worth to mention that one of the main reasons for discontinuation of a clinical trial is actually lack of funding. This has been, across all rationale and all reasons. This is like one of the certainty that you can find where funding is obviously vital for arriving to a licensing of the medicine. But often there is this idea of trying to postulate costs of clinical trials, especially for cannabis companies that perhaps are not familiar with what the pharmaceutical world, how the pharmaceutical world operates, and how it works in terms of phases and the costs that are associated with that. So I wanted to give. I think it's worth to mention. I wanted to give an idea as well of like just general costs that we can look at. Also timing. Usually we're talking around 7 years to be, in the good case scenario. So we're talking about clinical trials that are functioning. Everyone, the compound is safe. There is great efficacy. Everything is working great. The ethical committee is allowing, the trials to go forth at a good speed. So there is time, which is a factor of the cost. And then we have usually, as I said, 3 phases to finally define and bring a product to the market. And there is a period of review by the FDA that also has costs associated with that. And then there are costs with the phase 4 that usually is the so-called post-market authorization. That's already a happy problem to arrive there. Obviously, anyone that gets to phase 3 is already in the area of a happy problem. But we are talking from only a phase 1, starting a cost that can vary between 1.4 and 6.6 million dollars. So, and that's usually the cheapest type of trials that you can run, and then you start from there, arriving to a phase 4. So obviously, it's a big investment. How are you going to make such big risk, considering that there is factor of time and that there is a big question mark on whether actually you're ever going to license that medicine? It seems like really playing with fire. Yes, in a sense, it's a big challenge actually to be operating in research and make it successful. And I think one of the pivotal example of these truly has been Sativex. Sativex has had a great amount of studies for which people like us are very grateful, because there is so much science out there. But I'm sure that the investors of GW at the time weren't so happy actually of how it turned out in terms of sales with Sativex, because it was not really cost effective. It's now proving to be more cost effective actually, a Epidiolex. So there is, I think, a fine line between the amount of science that we put out, especially the quality of the science that we put out, because any science is going to cost us a lot. There is R&D to be taken care of. There are obviously the study design, the protocol. There is all the costs around, the clinical side. So the patient recruitment and then retaining of these patients. Think of studies that, when we talk about even pharmacoresistant epilepsy, most of the drugs fail after 3 months. So you need to have something that has a continuity of time. Or also you want to look for side effects in, well, what is going to happen after an MS patient is using Sativex for more than a year? Is it going to have cognitive problems? So you need to look at people also over length of time. And this means having retention of these patients, which is quite a chase. Also, you need people for that. You need costs that are associated, of course, with the regulatory and all the, anyone that is involved with this knows the pain, all the difficulties with the ethical committees, especially because you're dealing most of the time with something that is narcotic or anyway a non so easy to handle type of compound. And then, and all the rest, you have obviously the statistics, the data collection, the monitoring of the side effects, and of course, like the actual running of the trial. So usually what we see is that when you manage to create a situation in which there is like a sort of multidisciplinary support and partnership of different institutions, then is where it managed to have more success, the whole funding of the trial. Because as I said, trials are a long endeavor. It's like a really long-term commitment. So to have only one institution, whether that's pharma, academy, a foundation, a non-for-profit, and hospital, tends to have lower possibility to actually arrive at the end of this whole process. So most of the time, what we're seeing is where there are partnership, for example, between academia and pharma, and foundation, pharma, is where mainly you manage to achieve good results in terms of funding bodies. Now, obviously, as Lawrence just mentioned, Jazz Pharmaceutical, ex-GW, they acquired GW. It's obviously the main player on this field. If you compare the number of studies that have been initiated by Jazz versus the five most leading sponsoring players, it's Jazz is still leading the way, even if you combine all the studies that the other next five are managed to support and sponsor. So this also gives us, I think, a really good idea of the fact that, of course, it's more long the time that you will need to drive a trial that is linked and bound to an IP, because of course there is more regulatory, but it's quite evident that without an IP, there is way less driver and motivation for funding bodies to continue to sustain this challenge, basically. So then, and I think we will touch on this topic as well with Lawrence. He did a fantastic job on, putting together like this portfolio of IPs that have been generated by all of these players. And you can tell that there's been a great job at doing that, because this is one of the main difficulties with cannabinoids and with cannabis in general. When you need to, what's to register an IP, you really need to have something novel. So what's going to be the something novel? Is there a specific union of compounds that are put together? Is it a specific method of administration? So the level of specificity at which you need to go obviously can allow you to make certain claims, but that's one of the best ways actually to protect your investment until you manage to finally arrive to a market, which is going to be a long process, as I said. I think it's worth mentioning that in terms of who is funding, as I said, Jazz Pharma is like the main player, but then you have quite a strong presence of American universities, actually. So well-funded American universities have an important role that they are playing. Often, as I said, they are collaborating with pharma. So you can see, like Yale University co-sponsoring together with Pharmaceutical for running pediatric research on epilepsy. And so many of these type of activities are actually going on. I think what's interesting as well in the whole funding bodies versus like where it is and so on is also noticing that, in the US, as you know, I mean, although in these days it's just being discussed, it's still not a federally legal plant, right? Yet it's one of the countries that is driving most of the studies. And I think it's interesting also how this is also going with UK, GW, and Jazz, Ireland. So it's like not necessarily where there is like a clear, of course, it's important to have a regulation that allows, easier studies, but it's not necessarily that you have this like, okay, here is legal, here is where we run the most amount of studies. Otherwise, we would have like Canada and Uruguay as like leading this whole, clinical trial sort of sponsoring, but it's not the case. So I think it's just to give a summary of all of these. New York State Psychiatric Institute, it's actually the second leading, just after Jazz Pharmaceutical. And coming after, University of Colorado, University of California, Yale University. So all of these organizations is great because what they managed to do is that they also managed to run studies that not necessarily need to be driven by an IP. Often they can do so in collaboration with pharma, and usually that's where you see the most amount of success. When you have a study that is only run by a type of organization, usually is where it stops around phase 1, max phase 2. So this is quite, you can split data this way and you can see it quite clearly. And as I mentioned before, when I was talking about CBD, how almost 60% of the studies on CBD are, of phase 3 studies on CBD are on epilepsy. This is really is like the subtitles to what happens when you license a medicine. You have a lot of studies on that. there is the possibility for this huge investment to sort of come back.
Yeah, super interesting. I think very insightful, like to learn about this. But actually, like you rightfully mentioned, the patents database and the insights that Lori worked on. I think that's as you mentioned, super important for development of the sector. Lori, do you want to tell us a bit about the patent landscape? You looked at it on a global scale, and I mean Viola gave us a bit the heads up on the role of Just Pharmaceutical there as well. So what are the players in this market?
Yeah. So as mentioned, I mean, the role IP plays here is key. It's key to the whole process. And normally, in most industries, it's hard to really get a handle on what the patent landscape looks like, because you can only talk in general terms because there's so much information out there. But the fact that the pharmaceutical cannabis landscape is so concentrated, that's reflected in the patent landscape as well. So GW's dominance in the research, the clinical research, relates as well to the IP setting in a big way. So GW's portfolio absolutely dwarfs that of the next companies that are involved, that also have portfolios which cover the medical application of cannabinoids, but also, and this is something that Viola mentioned, the specificity that's required when it really comes down to it. You see it in the GW portfolio way more than in the next companies that are involved. It's this cannabinoid treating this condition, this cannabinoid being used in this way to treat this specific named condition. When you look at the other, and this is why so much of the patent section in the report focuses on GW, not just because they represent such a huge amount of the actual patents that are out there, but also because looking at the directions they're going and looking at the actual IP that they have, it really gives an idea of exactly which areas of interest at a specific level are being acted upon, are seeing activity. So yeah, I mean, after GW Pharma, there are some other companies involved, but like we've been able, because of the concentrated nature of the space, to essentially look at every company which has a portfolio that's really significant in some way or relevant. And after GW, I mean, the Canadian companies in this regard really never approach the same kind of focus on IP. Certainly not on the medical application, anyway, of cannabinoids. Canopy Growth are really one of the only ones that have a decent sized portfolio, and it's not medical focused really at all. So you can see the focus of where their research is gone, and it's manufacturing methodologies or different devices used for consumption, but not in a medical context. A lot of it is not necessarily relevant to medical. Of course, you could use certain manufacturing methodologies for making medical ingredients, but it's not explicitly medical in the same way that the GW portfolio is. In terms of companies that do have that medical focus, there's one really interesting one, which is Hanyi Biotech, which is a Chinese company, which has done quite a lot of research into the medical application of cannabinoids. But again, their portfolio is quite broad, and it's not necessarily just focused on cannabinoids. It's also focused on just consumer products, packaging. When it does focus on cannabinoids, it's not necessarily focused on the medical application of cannabinoids. It's again a lot of consumer products. And their portfolio overall already isn't as big as GW's. It's in fact a lot smaller. So it being divided in this way means that it's much less significant. But they are doing some interesting things, especially around the application of cannabinoids for the treatment of skin conditions. So inflammatory skin conditions or the treatment of scar tissue, which is interesting. but it ties into the consumer products as well. So they're at the same time looking at the consumer products in terms of cosmetics and skincare, but then at the medical application of it as well. Quite interesting. And then beyond that, there's a number of smaller companies which have more focused portfolios, but they're really, and these can be quite focused on the medical application of cannabinoids, but they're really focused in specific subsections. So you have the likes of Zynerba, for example, which are looking at new administration methods, administration through transdermal patches with microneedles, microgels, that kind of thing. You also have Echo Pharmaceuticals, which are focused on new product forms, especially with dronabinol. And another one actually that is quite interesting is Seek Medical in Israel, which are focused on medical vaporizers and inhalation. It's really a medical focus. It could be used for the consumer market as well, for the adult use market, but it seems like they're really focusing on the medical side first, and the medical vaporizer side first. So that's what makes them quite interesting in the medical context. So that's really what the landscape looks like right now, Barbara.
Thank you. And I mean, what's your view? Like, do you expect this kind of predominance of GW to persist, or is it what's your view? Like, you feel the market will diversify or consolidate further?
Yeah, I mean, the position of GW isn't going to change anytime soon. It looks like, because they're not becoming less dominant; they're becoming more so. They published over 320 new patents in 2022, which is about 20% of their existing portfolio up to that point. So they're really scaling up. And I mean, again, this is what happens when a company clearly has IP to protect. So just like what happens with the clinical trials, where you see an explosion of clinical trials around CBD for the treatment of epilepsy, or CBD adjacent cannabinoids for the treatment of epilepsy, you see the same from the IP side. So so many of their patents relate to the treatment of epilepsy, seizures from epilepsy, and so many of them revolve around CBD and CBD adjacent cannabinoids, and also other seizures. Instead of just epilepsy, it can be other conditions, seizures from other conditions as well. So I think what it will take to challenge that domination is a breakthrough, really, a promising breakthrough from one of these other companies that are working in different directions. Maybe from the likes of Hanyu Biotech, who are trying multiple things. What they seem to have picked a specific direction in skincare and the treatment of skincare-related conditions with cannabinoids. Or maybe Seek Medical. I mean, they were, since the report was actually published, so just this past July, Seek Medical were acquired for $650 million by the tobacco giant Philip Morris International. And Philip Morris International have been, over the years, they've been having this focus on inhalation, vaporization, medical vaporization, and on the consumer side. So for Seek Medical to have been acquired for this price, it's 10% of the price that GW was acquired for just a couple of years ago. So it shows that they could really be on something huge there. And this is the thing: the next breakthrough could be not necessarily related to a specific cannabinoid, but it could be device related. It could be related to product delivery or the administration method, or something around bioavailability. So as promising as all the research that's going on around new cannabinoids or different uses of cannabinoids, the way those cannabinoids are actually delivered or applied could lead to a huge amount of new interest and new activity as well. And I'm sure when that comes, that's going to be reflected in IP. You'll see a portfolio. You'll probably see the portfolio building before the breakthrough actually comes, for sure. So looking at the patent landscape will probably give us a good idea of like when where and when you can expect this breakthrough to come, and from who, from which direction as well.
Great. I mean, you mentioned delivery systems, formats. Fabio, any kind of view, any opinion on how that's developing? What's exciting you at the moment?
Yeah, yes. I can connect with which Lawrence was saying before, because we know that not only in the cannabis field, researchers and companies are trying to develop new delivery formats and formulation to provide a safer route of administration, to increase the bioavailability of the drugs, to obtain a targeted form of the administration, and to deliver uniform doses. And this is true also in the cannabis field. As Lawrence was saying, the product, there are no new products on the market. We have the classical cannabinoid, THC and CBD, and as I mentioned before, also other minor cannabinoid. But maybe the novelty are in the new delivery system or format, drug format. Indeed, for example, the main form that cannabinoids are used are for sure oral form, in the form of capsules and oils. These forms are effective, but not for all the condition. For example, in the acute condition, they are not so effective because their absorption rate and levels can be too low, and so maybe this can decrease the desired effect. So researchers are trying to find new methods. As Lawrence was saying, inhalation and vaporizer are new methods that are developing, not only in the scientific field, but we have also a lot of private companies that are developing this method. Maybe they start for the recreational use, but now they are moving to the medical use, because with an effective method of vaporization, that is very important to obtain the right effect of the cannabis, and also to preserve the phytocomplex, because we know that in the cannabis flowers there are not only cannabinoids, but a lot of substances like terpenes and flavonoids that can be useful to the whole effect that cannabis can give. So it's important for this method to maintain the right amount of terpenes when they vaporize. And this is a tricky thing. It's not easy to preserve the terpenes when vaporized. Regarding the new delivery methods, for sure, the new technologies develop the new interesting method such as nanocarriers and nanoemulsions. We know that nanocarriers are very small particles, usually coated with a polymer in the order of micrometers, that can deliver the drug, in this case the cannabinoid, to desired organ and to the desired cells, avoiding other organs. So this is very important to develop this kind of nanocarriers to deliver drugs in the desired site of the body. We have also this nanoemulsion that works much more in the same way. They are very small particles that are able to solubilize, so to put in solution even substances like cannabinoid that are very lipophilic, so they don't easily go in water. With the microemulsion, we can prepare water solution, and this is the best way to absorb drugs. So I can say nano carriers and nanoemulsion are the new delivery methods. Moreover, we have also transdermal patch, especially loaded with the THC, that are not only under investigation in some cases. We have studies, also clinical studies, that we have seen that it is a very useful methods, especially, for example, for condition as low back pain or muscle problems, because THC can be released slowly, and so the effect can be prolonged over time. So I think these are the main, the new delivery system that are being developing in this moment.
Okay, thank you very much. Laurie, we're kind of coming to the end of this webinar. So many things covered in the report. I'd keep going, but I guess, like, Laurie, could you tell us a bit about the let's say the market growth. And of course, in the report we have market sizing. What can we find in the future? What are we expecting in the pharmaceutical cannabis sector, like looking forward? And I mean, we're getting to the end, so I encourage Viola and Fabio, if you want to comment on this as well. Like it's certainly a good way to close our webinar, I think. Laurie.
Yeah, sure. And I'll try to be quick because I know there is some interest in a bit of Q&A afterwards. So, I mean, the way the market is at the moment, we calculate the market from our models at about 1.1 billion US dollars. That's global market size. So, but that's mostly Epidiolex. So that's really driven by Epidiolex sales, like specifically in the US. So we see market growth will be driven mostly by Epidiolex, or at least we expect it to, because dronabinol is a reasonably stagnant market overall, and Sativex has seen small growth, but really not, in comparison to Epidiolex sales, it's really minimal. So. That's really US focused, because on the European side, which is a much smaller market in terms of pharmaceutical cannabis, it's more of an even split between Epidiolex, Sativex, and dronabinol. And the things to watch really are when generics hit the market. So Viola mentioned earlier that Jazz are involved in suits against some of the companies which are positioning themselves to become generic CBD suppliers to the US. And from our sources, generic CBD generic Epidiolex could be on the US market as early as 2026 or 2027. So that'll have a huge impact on sales there. Around the same time frame, we might see generics of Sativex on the European market. So the generic form is nabiximols. And given that Sativex has actually been found to be quite effective across a number of different conditions, and there's a lot of interest in using it, but one of the main reasons given by health authorities for not using it, where it's often been around price rather than efficacy. So once the price element is taken out of the equation, we might see a lot more uptake in Europe. But if we see a new breakthrough for a new drug, particularly around pain, which is where all the clinical activity is at the moment, you can see massive market growth. But that's a bit of an unknown. It depends on adoption. It depends on the nature of the medicine itself. But if something does get through for the treatment of pain, we do expect to see significant sales on that. Something similar or bigger than Epidiolex, which has obviously been huge in the past few years. So that's essentially how we see the development of the market at the moment of the different treatments.
Thank you very much. And yeah, with the report, there's a market sizing data as well. So if readers want to kind of deep dive in that's available. Viola and Fabio, do you want to add something on this topic before we take some of the questions from the audience?
Well, I completely agree with Lawrence, because now the cannabis have been researched for a lot of conditions. Almost all the medical conditions have been explored in the world of cannabis. We have seen that it's effective in a lot of conditions. For example, a few weeks ago, I read a study about the CBD used against hair loss. It was effective also in hair loss. So we have a lot of studies that support the use of cannabis. Now the big problem is adoption. We have the studies, but the adoption is the big problem. If cannabis will be adopted in a more wide way in more countries, and the laws in each country will open to adoption, maybe we can see an increase in the market. Otherwise, I think we are almost at the top. So if things don't change in a regulatory way, we will not see big changes in the market.
All right. Thank you very much. So I've been some of the questions. So maybe we we take one of them to start with. So I'm reading, some countries seek to force the generation of clinical evidence, setting deadlines for presenting results. For example, Brazil with 5-year sales authorization. Do you expect this to diversify the global panorama? I don't know if anybody wants to take this one.
Maybe I do. I mean, we're starting to see this from some countries, especially for the adoption of cannabis, also in the context of recreational markets. We're seeing this with the pilots in the Netherlands, with the pilots in Switzerland. So there are some, state-driven support onto research. Now, the question is, once again, what we've been discussing before. So whether actually the state is only requiring stuff and it's not putting a platform and an environment for actually this type of data to be produced. So clearly, is there a support in the production of this study? Is there a support, a financial support from the state or not? So I think really the matter of the question is this one. And in this particular case, I don't know how it's set up in Brazil. So it's hard to reply. But the question really as a researcher is who's going to pay the bills rather than, the requirements that the country can have. And also, let's not forget that science is across countries. So as much as sometimes I hear these sentences and I find them very hilarious. No, but we were doing this stuff under the radar. There is no science under the radar. If you're doing a clinical trial and that is legitimate, that is going to be a public knowledge. That is going to be public. Anyone can access the understanding of those data. So whether we produce new data to integrate CBD or whatever in Brazil, that's still going to be useful data in Iraq. So it's the nature of science, really, theoretically.
Okay, maybe one around patents. Are there many patents expiring in the short term or opportunities for generic manufacturers in the next 2 years?
Yeah, so I think I'll take this one. Yes, I mean, the fact there's this lawsuit ongoing in the US tells you all you need to know. GW know that the generics are coming. And according to them, they have patents that run until the mid 2030s, but the industry, people in the industry, I mean, it's 13 different companies that the lawsuit is against in the US. So there's a lot of jostling to position amongst these companies to position themselves as generics manufacturers. So that's obviously a huge opportunity. I haven't heard anything about Sativex, to be honest. So that could be.
I can add something here. There was also a quite big lawsuit for the way it's manufactured Sativex, because I think some comments already here, it's really hard to say something, oh, this is novel about this plant. So what is really novel? And in that case, what was been patented for Sativex was the CO2 method of extraction. So, and then clearly that is a method that is used by many other big companies. So it's a war with lawyers.
Yeah, 100%. That's and actually one of the other questions is quite an interesting one. I think then maybe we'll wrap it up. Like I'll still a few minutes more to our audience, but we get asked. I understand from my sources that there should not be a justified case to protect IP on any CBD THC ratio. Any thoughts? So it's quite a specific kind of thing within a drug that's still super important, right? Like it's kind of very important for the drug to work. It's an essential element. What's the view of you guys?
So I think
yeah, an IP.
Oh,
you go ahead.
it's okay.
I mean, also, I would like to add that this is a really nice report, and if I'm not wrong, the guys can testify this. There is also additional material only on IPs, right? Like data, all the extra data that are also on IP portfolio. So I think anyone actually interested to make a business plan out of this maybe could invest in that, just as an opinion. But yes, of course, to create an IP, you cannot just say, well, the new novelty is a percentage of CBD versus a percentage of THC. The novelty, it's about what you do with it. Can you claim something? Is that a claim on the target pathology? It's a claim on the method of, let's not forget, nabiximols, it's a oromucosal spray. So actually, at the time it came out, there was also a novelty in that because it's a different sublingual way of administration. Now, perhaps many could say that for a multiple sclerosis patient, that probably was not like the really ideal method of administration, but still had a certain type of novelty. So I think it really needs to be understood the process of how and what consists an intellectual property. And I would recommend a good lawyer to go through with this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that a lot of the patent filings I see are very broad in terms of the cannabinoids they cover. So rather than just being ratios of THC and CBD, I think we'll find that it'll be combinations of other cannabinoids as well, where perhaps there is more of a claim for it to be unique because minor cannabinoids don't exist in huge. They don't tend to exist in huge quantities in the plant. But as just to echo what Viola said, yeah, I think often it's going to be the uniqueness of the patent or the novelty of the invention will have to rely on the delivery method or the manufacturing methodology, as you know, both were at play for Sativex. So there'll have to be some other element. The compound itself will have to be complex enough that you can claim uniqueness or novelty, or something about the bioavailability or the delivery method or some kind of technological innovation will have to come into play as well. I should say that I also am not a lawyer, so to get to the real micro detail, it would take somebody with a more legal mind. But that would be my analysis of the situation based on the landscape.
Thank you so much. So I think we have to wrap it up. As much as I really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you very much, Viola, Fabio, and Lawrence. Before we go, I just want to remind everybody on this webinar that there is a special discount for attendees, which is like 30% off the report, the clinical trials database, the patent portfolio, and also the analyst consultation. So it's in the chat. The code is web30. And I mean, if you have further question, yeah, like you can find the answers in the report and definitely get in touch with us. Our website is prohibitionpartners.com. So thank you very much to everybody. And yeah, like very happy I got to moderate this interesting discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara, Lawrence. It was a pleasure.